Trisha, great to see you. Welcome to Pop Alternative.
Well, thank you for having me. Great to see you as well.
I'm really excited. I mean, before we get into the Unborn, the true crime podcast, there's going to be a point of time where, as a creative, you're going to kind of do a lot of things. You're going to maybe act, create, do voiceovers. Did that just happen for you, or was that like premeditated, would you say?
Oh, God. That's such a great question. So, I think in my heart, I always wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, write, direct, and produce. And I did produce. And I choreographed from a really young age because I was a really serious ballerina as a kid. But I think it's very strange because I went to law school. I went to Brooklyn Law School, and I went straight to work for a federal criminal defense firm. So I was like by far the youngest person in the federal courthouse who was licensed to practice law. And in fact, every time I would step in front of a judge, they would ask me in front of the whole room, like, are you licensed to practice in this jurisdiction? Which wasn't at all demoralizing. But for some reason even though I was the only girl in the federal criminal bar, in the artist world, I was like, well, I want to direct television and film, but I'm a girl. Like I was putting these like weird roadblocks in front of myself.
Yeah.
And so I've always been a huge fan of true crime. This is actually the second true crime podcast I've done, but the first one was more of a comedic podcast.
Yep.
This one is not, although two of my friends, Jasmine Simon and Dule Hill, posted and they were like, it's so funny. And I'm like, it is, but I guess, hey, I love that.
Well,
but,
I find it interesting because there is this surge of popularity of content in the true crime world, right? Whether it's like a podcast, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a series or a movie. So I'm wondering, from a creative perspective, is it more fun, or does it feel like there's more pressure to kind of work in this space at a time when there's a big appetite for it, so to speak?
So currently, because we want to go to number one, there's more pressure, right?
Yeah.
In the creating of it, there wasn't a lot of pressure because at first it was just my husband and I. We got this story dropped into our lap, and we were like being creative together during COVID. And, breaking story and, finding these interviews and doing things that we'd never done before. Because in my previous podcast, it was just a talk podcast with myself and Kevin Hines, who, has been a mentor of mine. And we met on the set of Rake, and then we worked together on HBO's Perry Mason, and we did the true crime pilot together. But it was just us talking. And so this was different because this was like, I'm interviewing all these people and we're crafting it, and it just kept growing. So in that way, it's super fun. Luckily my husband and I don't have kids because I don't know how we could have a kid and a podcast. It would be too much for one's relationship, but the creating of it, the making of it fun, the putting it out for everybody to see, scary.
Absolutely. No, that's well said. Every idea of every piece of content, whether it's a podcast or a movie or film, even before scripts, there's always that kind of first idea and concept, right? And rubric and outline, right?
Yeah.
With the Unborn, what was, because I find that interesting, right? It's your second podcast and everything. You wanted to do something a bit different. Like, what is that first rubric or concept look like even before the overall kind of creation process of it? I'm curious about that, early stages, Trisha.
If in the first episode I explained this briefly, so I'll tell you and your listeners so it makes sense ahead of time. Basically, my husband and I were actually writing a horror film together at the time. Okay, and weirdly, he gets a phone call from a friend of his who he's had for almost over a decade. Yep. My husband is from Toluca Lake, California, and he left about 12 years ago to guide hunts in Kansas and take his hand at being an amateur boxer. During that time, he met this guy who he guided hunts for, and they've been very, very close friends ever since. So somebody who is in the inner circle of this true crime happening was at the camp that weekend, was on the ranch with his friend, told the story as it was unraveling in real time. Like the guys from Pennsylvania, the gentleman who told my husband's friend the story is from Pennsylvania. He was in Kansas hunting, but he was getting phone calls from the subject matter's dad and his life partner, because they were like, this is happening. And, you know, so he's filling in his friends. And the guy that owns the outfit was like, I need to call my buddy who's a Hollywood writer. This story sounds amazing. So when they called, my husband was like, felt like it was great for a podcast. He loves true crime, but not as much as me. Like I'm the crazy person who watches murder until I fall asleep, you know. And so he said to them, hey, you know, I'd love to bring my wife in and we think this is a podcast. Would you guys talk to us tomorrow? So then we just got on the phone with Jared, who is the subject matter of the show, the next day, and his boss. And he just started telling us. And it was really, you know, I would say less than 48 hours after he found out the truth of what was really going on, as opposed to what he had been led to believe for the 9 months prior.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love when I started Popternative in 2015, it was just kind of like it was chatting about things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I really love like the behind the scenes, because like we see and listen, in this case, or like we watch a lot of content. And there were like so many conversations or like little things or like little bounces that happened that basically became what we see on TV, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Or what we listen to as a podcast. Like it's crazy to think about the journeys, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because I always, you know, I mean, still probably Serial is like the most popular true crime podcast ever. And that journey was, you know, years and years, right? Because they were following. And we started with this story in December of 2020.
Yep.
And we started doing our interviews in April of 2020. Yep. We went back to Pennsylvania last May, so May of 2024. And, you know, got more interviews, more voices, more texture, more background, more opinions. And, you know, kept weaving them all together, trying to add in, you know, doctors and psychologists and people that could give us a medical perspective of, you know, what was going on. So, yeah.
So I'm excited to ask you this because I'm going to make this kind of a different version of a question I usually ask. So like I've talked to like the incredible Bill Curtis about this, you know, and I asked him about true crime. I asked him about misconceptions about true crime, because I always find it interesting, misconceptions, right? Like people think it's like this, and then the people like yourself that are really kind of dialed in the podcast world for true crime. So I want to ask you, what is the misconception about the true crime podcast community? Like, what is there something that you've kind of learned or like you realize about the...
I haven't learned or realized this. It's my instinct that chicks dig it, you know, more than guys. I think that women are just more open to sharing the truth of their love for true crime, and men are kind of like a little bit more embarrassed that they're into it. So I think that that's a misconception. And I think the reason that I say that is because our story, we've pitched it to like anyone we've had dinner with in the past 4 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's not, and it doesn't matter if they're in the 25 age range or the 75 age range, male, female, they're like, wait, what? You know, so I think that might be a misconception.
No, that's well said. I find it interesting because you know how it is online. Everyone's like, oh, I know exactly how it is. It's like this. And it's like, you know, the people that are in that world every day are like, it's actually the opposite of that because I'm in that world, right? But like, you know, I just want to know from a creative perspective, like how separate are past journeys or past projects that you worked on compared to something like the Unborn? Like, do you bring mindsets, preparations from stuff like Jury Duty or Garden State to something like the Unborn, or they're completely separate once you're kind of done with them and wrap them, so to speak? Because it's all storytelling at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. I mean, the big similarity between my prep for Jury Duty and my prep for this was that I had to write all my own questions for all of the witnesses that I had like 12 or more
Like the
witnesses
producer
on the
component
stand,
too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In jury duty. I had to prepare all those questions. Because, my producers and writers, they weren't lawyers, so they didn't write the questions, and so we kind of created, the characters together, and we were building the story together, and then I had to write all the questions for them. And so similarly to preparing to interview, people that witnessed this situation, I had to prepare a bunch of questions for them as well.
Yeah.
So, so kind of deciding like flow and where you want to start and how you want to ramp up. And, one really fun thing was that there were a couple questions that I had asked the first 2 or 3 people that I interviewed, and they answered like extremely similarly without knowing what the answer was. And then I realized, I need to go back and ask everyone these same, because I could hear, I was like editing it in my head. I could hear how it would like weave together and be cool for the audience to hear our main cast members answer the same question in their own voice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's so well said. And, your podcast, The Unborn, recently dropped on iHeartRadio, which is exciting. So all the episodes are available now?
No, they are not. So we came out 2 days ago, and we have already, we've jumped from the 101 position to the 75 position to the 55 position. And this morning we checked, we were at 45 on top true crime podcasts. I'm hoping that we have gone up even more, maybe broke the top 20. I don't know. But right now there is only the first 2 episodes are out. So there's 7 episodes. So there'll be 1 episode for the next 5 weeks. And then potentially a, last minute rogue 8th episode that
bonus
does a little
episode, bonus round. Absolutely.
A bonus round.
iHeartRadio, they're going to check that out, The Unborn. Trisha, so great chatting with you. Thanks so much for your time.
So great chatting with you, and congratulations on In-Flight.
I appreciate that. Yes. Shout out to Maria Russell.
Shout out to Maria Russell, Tiffany Smith, Drew McNair.
Yeah, so many amazing people. Your Instagram account is just your name if people want to keep update with everything, right?
Yes, at Trisha LaFache.
Is there anything else like where specifically they could check out The Unborn? Like, there's obviously iHeartRadio. Was there anything else specifically?
Well, on our producers Audio Up Media on their Instagram page, but we're going to definitely be adding more and more and more. And so if they go to either Audio Up or to my handle,
I was going to say, if they go to your Instagram account, just go to the stories. There's going to be all the tags and like directions.
Yes, all the tags will be running wild.
Awesome. Well, this has been Pop Turn. YouTube.com/Pop Turn for previous episodes. Till next time, it's Trisha and PD Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.